official capacity, and we'll go again. Good morning, all. Good afternoon. My name is Daniel York. My official capacity, I'm here at GSA, Office of Government-Wide Policy, but I come to you today as the government chair of the IT Modernization and Management Community of Interest, where I have a great program for you today. But before we get to it, I do want to pass you to Varsha, who's going to talk a little bit about our COI.
Hi, everyone. Very nice to meet you all. Real quick about our ITMM COI. For those who may be new to ITMM, our community is really about, one thing, helping government agencies manage IT better while modernizing for tomorrow. That's our overall theme. We bring together leaders from government and industry to share some practical lessons, some proven approaches, honest insights, what it actually takes to strengthen IT management. And our scope is intentionally broad. This COI, we have kept intentionally broad, so it's not just about technology. It's about how we manage it, right? So, which includes governance, FITARA, CPIC, TBM, these type projects that we're going to be discussing today, project management, program management, acquisition, and everything under that sun, right? So in short, we focus on policies, processes, and people that make this modernization sustainable. So really happy to have you all here, and I will pass it on. Dan, should we do the leadership overview real quick, or just transition to today's session?
We can just transition. I'm super curious to hear the session from Gabrielle. I don't know if you want to kick them off. You want me to? Great. So just recently, we as a community of interest have wrapped up a project called Pilots to Production. I believe that's now posted on the ACT-IAC website. And if I'm willing to bet, Nancy will have it posted in the chat in a matter of seconds to the paper on that. The project team did a really, really good job of laying out the challenges that some agencies have, like anything from the idea stage, the pilot stage, and into an actually workable tool. But not to steal their thunder, I'm going to pass it to Gabrielle, who's going to walk us through the project. Take it away, Gabrielle.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate the introduction. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see it?
No,
Yes.
not yet.
It's coming up now, slowly, I guess.
There it goes.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, great. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in and being here. I'm Gabrielle Davidsen, and today I'm co-presenting with Chineme and Lisa to share our findings from our white paper, Pilots to Production, Integrated Findings and Case Studies, released in February. So this was a collaborative effort with ACT-IAC, IT Management Modernization Community of Interest. We pulled together practitioner interviews, case studies, academic research, all of which focused on one central challenge: helping government agencies successfully move technology pilots into full-scale production. So over the next hour, we're going to dig into what most often prevents pilots from scaling, what actually makes transitions work, and the practical recommendations that come out of real experiences across federal agencies and industries. But first, a few housekeeping items before we start. If you wouldn't mind placing any questions or comments in the chat, or raise your hand at the end of the presentation, then we'll be able to address any questions you have now. Let's jump straight into it. So here's how our time together is going to be structured. We'll start with an overview of the framework we use for this study. We'll walk through some of the common challenges and success factors, after which we'll dive into the case studies that shaped our research. Then we'll talk about some of the lessons learned and the common obstacles that agencies run into, and finally cover what separates the successful transition from the ones that stall. We'll also wrap up with some practical recommendations and where we think the future research should go. But before we start, we would like to take a moment to thank ACT-IAC, IT Management and Modernization COI, for sponsoring this work. Wouldn't exist without your support, so a big thank you from all of us. Also, would like to extend a special thank you to all of our interviewees from both the federal government and private sector. They're all listed here on the right-hand side of the slide. And frankly, their time and candid insights were invaluable. In a few minutes, my co-presenter, Lisa, will walk through some of their use cases in more detail. Now, let me set the stage for why this work is important. Excuse me, I skipped a slide there. Government agencies rely heavily on pilot projects to test new technologies and reduce risk before committing to large-scale deployments. However, many pilots, despite showing these encouraging early results, stall before reaching production. The critical insight here is that these failures often arise not from technical deficiencies, but from gaps in governance, security alignment, organizational readiness, and procurement processes. So successful transitions require synchronizing three key elements, I should say: people, processes, and technology, all within the specific constraints of federal environments. Technical capability alone is simply insufficient. Our research draws on a structured, multidisciplinary approach, examining both the operational and organizational sides of moving from a pilot to production. So at its core is our pilots to production contingency theory framework. This is built on the premise that successfully scaling isn't a one-size-fits-all, but depends on how well organizations adapt to their specific context. So this framework shaped 5 of our key questions that drove our investigation. The first, when organizations hit roadblocks during transitions, what tends to get in the way most often? And how do the smart ones get ahead of these problems before they derail progress? Beyond just checking compliance boxes, we wanted to explore how strong governance, risk management, and building in cybersecurity from the start actually shape whether scaling happens safely and on schedule. We also wanted to find out what really makes the difference between users grudgingly tolerating a new system and genuinely embracing it, and how team structures, training, and change management either help or hurt that outcome. In terms of measures, we asked our interviewees, when their organizations wove in KPIs, SLAs, and XLAs, what did that do for adoption and the ability to grow sustainably? Finally, we want to know if teams put people at the center of how they design and involve stakeholders early and often, and what kind of difference did that make, not just for adoption, but for how smoothly things actually ran day to day. So to answer these questions, we use qualitative and quantitative methods. We pulled from case studies, practitioner interviews, organizational documentation, and peer-reviewed literature from the past 5 years. And the result is a body of findings that's both rigorously evidence-based and practically actionable. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Lisa to talk about common challenges.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gabrielle. Good afternoon, everyone. We're really excited to share our findings with you. As we start off with common challenges, we have 6 primary issues or challenges that were brought up in our research that occurred regardless of the agency size or the mission. Let's go ahead and explore these areas and start out with scope creep, one of our favorites. So scope creep can be described as the persistent threat to success that occurs when new or evolving requirements are introduced during the pilot. So a pilot is meant to validate the feasibility and cost effectiveness. However, when these challenges occur to the scope of the project, challenges can get entangled into premature expansion, and teams could fail to define a minimum viable product that works, that incorporates user adoption, organizational change management, total experience, and the decision-making protocols. To avoid this disruption from scope creep, teams should focus on validating the feasibility and cost effectiveness of the pilot and not expanding the scope. This brings us to the second challenge, which is unclear MVPs. So research revealed that inexplicit MVPs are one of the most common and costly reasons that pilots fail. When the objectives aren't sharply defined or properly detailed, the teams end up testing too much or too soon. So a true MVP should do one thing: validate the core functionality with minimal investment. The goal is to provide a focused test bed for feasibility and performance, not a place to absorb unplanned changes or to expand the scope midstream. A third challenge we encountered was shadow governance. This can be described as a negative occurrence that takes place when the key decisions are made informally, outside of the documented channels and without proper visibility. While the decisions are sometimes intended to expedite progress, the undocumented decisions can lead to an outdated or an undocumented set of risks or unchecked scope expansion. All of this can compromise the project's integrity. The fourth challenge is procurement complexity. This can limit contract models and options, slow executions, fragment accountability, and limit flexibility. All of this can present risks to the initial IT pilot initiatives. Additionally, traditional contract models with a narrow focus concentrate on deliverables versus outcomes, which can inadvertently contain innovation, or it can constrain and hinder collaboration. These complexities, however, can create opportunities if they're identified early. By aligning governance forums, clarifying the responsibilities, and emphasizing outcome-oriented contracts, agencies can turn potential friction points into catalysts for innovation. The fifth challenge that we identified is security bottlenecks that can delay security approvals, such as authority to operate documentation, multi-factor authentication implementation, and zero trust requirements. It can also slow or stall pilot deployments in government environments. When the security expectations surface late or without clear testing pathways, teams face friction and rework. So to prevent this, teams can engage early with cybersecurity partners to turn these risks into opportunities that will allow for smoother, more predictable scaling, compliance approval, testing, and ultimately successful deployments. And finally, the sixth primary challenge that we identified is executive sponsorship, limited executive sponsorship. Unaligned groups that lack clear executive sponsorship can be impacted with challenges to sustained engagement, partnerships, collaboration, empowerment, training, or sufficient knowledge transfers. Weak executive sponsorship erodes decision authority, it slows the momentum, and it also increases the risk of the pilot failure. Without senior leadership and senior leader engagement, teams default to habitual thinking, cognizant resistance, and also overconfidence from their past experience, even if the conditions demand adaptation. We found that fragmented stakeholders across bureaus may further dilute alignment, creating inconsistent communication or delayed decision-making. Without a unified vision, pilots are easily deprioritized amid competing demands. So all this sounds like bad news. However, it is integrated with ways to overcome that in the success factors that we're going to uncover next in our next slide. When transitioning to production, an intentional blend of the overall vision, technical readiness, and operational discipline is needed. So our research revealed that there are 5 primary enablers that will help drive successful pilots. So let's kick it off with strategically focusing and committing to executive sponsorship and promotion for new pilots. We found that agencies can attain alignment on human-centered solutions while managing their risk and operational constraints. What does this look like? Well, it can be prioritized as follows. When successful, executives provide clear vision, unlock resources, they implement decisions, and they shield the initiative from competing priorities while ensuring strategic alignment across the technical teams and stakeholders. We found that teams who prioritize and integrate human-centered solutions are based on empathy-driven research, prototype iterative testing, and also built-in feedback loops to reduce friction and increase trust. The executives and teams identify and manage operational constraints and clearly define schedules and have an understanding of what it means to be done. And finally, everyone engages in proactive continuous risk management by maintaining live risk registers that track the triggers, the mitigations, and the ownership. The second success factor is technical and operational readiness. This is built on scalable architecture with standardized APIs, automated DevOps pipelines, and a secure, compliant foundation. We found that when this approach is taken, it supports phased deployments with clearly defined security and also compliant requirements. Third, it's important to have organizational readiness strategies and plans to ensure that the stakeholders buy in and adopt what is being changed while managing the training readiness activities and also sustain performance across both the business teams and the technical teams. This provides alignment, coordination, and accountability throughout the span of each project. The fourth success factor is the mitigation of security bottlenecks. Now, this requires the integration of security and compliance throughout the entire development lifecycle to ensure that the systems are resilient, functional, and aligned to regulatory expectations and requirements. By engaging cybersecurity stakeholders from the project inception and applying the Cyber by Design principles, continuous feedback, shared accountability, and milestone-aligned reviews, teams can mitigate the choke points. Additionally, when you embed security and compliance into every phase, it strengthens trust, performance, and mission alignment across the organization. And finally, teams were successful when there were clear vendor procurement practices, documentation, and communications. When the procurement teams align the mission needs with capable vendors, something magical happens. They create shared clarity around requirements and expected outcomes. This alignment will enable effective management to be built on coordination, open collaboration, and the ability to adapt throughout the process. So we've covered the challenges and success factors. What I'd like to do next is take a brief look at the case studies where we've drawn a lot of this information from. Now, while we have multiple case studies, we've chosen 4 to review today to kind of give you an understanding of how we derived at these initial challenges and success factors. Let's begin by looking at the Department of State project for a passport renewal pilot. If you look on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll notice that we have the challenges, successes, and lessons learned, but I'd love to just start out by giving you an overview of what the project was about. The State Department set out to modernize a paper-based passport renewal process by creating a fully digital online experience. The initial pilot struggled because the scope was too broad. It placed unexpected strain on the backend systems, and it also created operational bottlenecks. They had to scrap that, reboot, and magically, something happened. The team narrowed the scope of the focus on a streamlined front-end intake workflow and minimized disruption of existing processes. They reset the initial MVP, clarifying it, and placed accountability with the business-led cross-functional product team, which proved critical in gaining momentum. During this process, the challenges were clear to the team. They initially had an overly complex scope, a poorly defined MVP, and limited cross-functional ownership. However, when they rebooted, they delivered meaningful successes that included a tighter scope, the well-defined MVP, and a unified team structure that brought together business and technical partners. The lessons learned from this case study are widely applicable for all future projects. First, ensure everyone is aligned on clear goals and prepared for new successes. In this case, the State Department invested in effective training to also help the staff operate and evolve that new solution. The second lesson was to avoid overly ambitious pilot objectives that outpace organizational readiness. Third, define strong MVP boundaries and ensure that the full team understands these boundaries and are on board with them. And finally, empower cross-functional ownership to keep the pilots grounded, accountable, and positioned for successful scaling. The second case study is with the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. They had 2 pilot efforts that revealed a powerful contrast in what drives successful adoption. The authentication pilot thrived because the solution was simple, it was intuitive, and it fit naturally into their user habits. Organizational change management wasn't treated as a one-time activity. It was built in a continuous deliverable, helping users adapt with minimal friction, a little at a time. In a separate proof of concept, they did a new data platform. It had the opposite effect. They struggled with multiple challenges despite it being a technically sound initiative. Users resisted shifting their reporting workflows, and the team lacked the training, support, and OCM needed to guide the change. That result was low adoption and a proof of concept that never gained traction. The lesson from this case study is that user adoption must be treated as a core success metric, not an afterthought. They also found that teams often assume users will adjust on their own, but without structured training, total experience design, and customer journey support, even the technical solutions face resistance to adoption. Pilots that align with existing behaviors integrate OCM throughout the process and apply human-centered design principles. They are far more likely to succeed. On the next slide, we'll take two more case studies and evaluate what they found according to their challenges, successes, and lessons learned. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office had two technology pilots. They illustrate how technical readiness and strong stakeholder accountability can work together to drive meaningful innovation. So the first pilot focused on using machine learning to support patent classification. Just to give you a little background, they aimed to train on an ML model to categorize applications on work that was traditionally done manually. This went well, with the team ultimately achieving more than 90% precision. That level of accuracy gave leaders the confidence to scale the solution and replace the manual classification process with an automated production-ready capability. However, the second pilot introduced a tool named Scout, which is a generative AI tool that brings together the strengths of multiple language models. Scout acts like a supercharged research assistant for patent examiners. It integrates the manual patent examination procedures and relevant court opinions to support real-time decision-making. So instead of searching for through multiple systems, examiners could access consolidated context-aware guidance in one place in an interface that's very similar to something like Wikipedia. Across both pilots, the challenges were consistent. You must ensure stakeholder accountability, align technical success with operational realities, and keep the mission priorities front and center. The successes were equally clear. They included shared ownership, strong technical preparedness, and a deep understanding of the delivery constraints. Collectively, these success factors contributed to forward momentum on the projects. The key lessons from this include ensuring sustained stakeholder engagement, visible leadership and sponsorship, and ensuring technical readiness that is aligned with the stakeholders' level of commitment. When teams share a clear definition of done, understand the constraints, and follow phased deployment strategies, they can refine solutions iteratively while managing the risk and ensuring that the technical teams are equipped to support production-level demands. These USPTO pilots show how disciplined collaboration and thoughtful planning turn emerging technologies into mission-aligned capabilities. And the final study is with the Federal Communications Commission. In our last study, the FCC undertook a highly complex cloud migration. This required close coordination across multiple bureaus, each with its own IT governance practices and operational priorities. Now, we've all worked in complicated situations and environments, and this is one of those. Based on all this diversity, the team had to tailor its approach to meet these various needs across the bureaus, using a mix of mitigation strategies such as lift and shift, replatforming, and reverse engineering legacy applications. Throughout this project, the biggest challenges really centered on maintaining strong stakeholder engagement, navigating intricate technical transitions, and ensuring security and compliance across the bureaus. Despite these hurdles, the project achieved several important successes. For example, the team developed a detailed, structured project schedule that helped manage the complexity of the migration phases. They also prioritized early and continuous stakeholder engagement, which proved essential for keeping the effort aligned and moving forward. A disciplined approach to planning and tool management further supported the consistency and predictability of this project. Overall, the lessons learned reveal that the detailed schedules are really critical for managing multi-phase migrations and preventing bottlenecks. Also, early ongoing coordination across stakeholders is essential to avoid delays that often surface late in the process. You can learn more about these case studies and other work and research that we've included in our full white paper. Next, my colleague Chineme is going to review some lessons learned, recommendations, and suggestions for future research.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us today. In the next slides, I will present the recurring lessons we noticed. I will also go over some recommendations that we have and the suggestions for future research that could provide additional insights for us. While reviewing the case studies, a few lessons kept showing up again and again. First, pilots succeed when people actually have vested interest in the pilot's success. So when stakeholders, leadership, and the teams all share ownership, the pilot stops being an experiment for one group and starts becoming part of the agency's mission that everybody supports. The second recurring lesson is that scope discipline matters. Many pilots fail because they try to do too much too early. The most successful ones start with a clear MVP, deliver something useful quickly, and then expand from there. Technical success alone is also never enough. Several of the cases show that even strong technical solutions failed when users weren't properly prepared or trained or supported. Organizational change management, training, and human-centered design must be treated as part of the core deliverables. Another consistent lesson is the need for structured planning and risk management. Detailed schedules, living risk registers, and continuous communication prevent small issues from becoming major failures. And finally, the pilots that scaled well had adaptive governance. They had structure for security and compliance, but they also had enough flexibility to adjust when gaps or surprises appeared. Taken together, the message is simple and clear. When we scale from pilot to production, it's rarely just about the technology alone. We have to have disciplined scope, shared ownership, thoughtful change management, and proactive risk awareness. All of them working together from the very beginning. In the next slide, I will go over some recommendations. Based on what we learned from these case studies, we have 6 practical recommendations that can help agencies create more scalable and repeatable paths from pilot to production. First, every pilot should start with a clear governance model that will define the goals, the decision points, and the success criteria for each phase so that teams will know what progress will actually look like. Second, compliance requirements such as security, privacy, accessibility, and other mandates should be built in from the beginning rather than treated as last-minute approvals. In other words, projects should be secure and compliant by design. Third, pilots should prioritize human-centered design by including dedicated organizational change management and user experience expertise on the team. These experts will help with adoption because adoption ultimately determines whether a pilot succeeds. A fourth recommendation is that teams should track outcome-oriented metrics that balance technical performance with user experience so that success reflects real mission impact and business value. Another recommendation is that pilots should be led by cross-functional teams that are made up of technical experts, business owners, and operational leaders so that ownership is shared and the transition to production is smoother. And finally, organizations should adopt more agile procurement approaches that focus on mission outcomes and that use contract language that supports rapid iteration and strong collaboration with all partners. Together, these practices can help turn pilots into real operational capabilities rather than experiments that never scale. On the next slide, I would present some of the suggestions we have for future research. So looking ahead, there are a few areas where more research could be done to provide additional insights that can help refine how agencies move from pilots to production. First, we need more quantitative and qualitative analysis to better predict which pilots is likely to scale successfully. If we can examine how performance frameworks relate to measurable outcomes, agencies could begin developing predictive models to assess a pilot's viability and its operational impact, and to better align strategy, metrics, and user experience. The second research suggestion is to examine how agencies maintain momentum when resources fluctuate. This future research should investigate how teams adapt workflows, training, and automation when they are faced with staffing or budget changes or spikes in workload. And it could identify which practices can help sustain performance and help retain institutional knowledge. And the third suggestion we have is for further research to conduct a deeper study of outcome-oriented procurement models and vendor collaboration. Insights from contracts that prioritize mission outcomes, contracts that allow for flexible engagement and that have a collaborative delivery approach. Insights on how these affect innovation and speed to production could help shape procurement strategies that will support long-term value rather than just transactional deliverables. And with this, I will return the mic to Gabrielle to close us out.
You're on mute, Gabrielle.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
No worries.
Thanks, Chineme. So let's bring it all together. Everything we've covered comes back to three things: disciplined scope management, proactive operational readiness, and intentional user engagement. That means treating OCM and training as core deliverables, not afterthoughts. It also means setting clear MVP boundaries so your team knows what's in and what's out. And it means tracking experience metrics from day one. If you don't do these things, you risk the watermelon effect, where everything looks green on the outside, status reports, dashboards, executive updates, but cut it open and it's red on the inside. Users are frustrated, adoption is slow, and the value you promised isn't being realized. So the goal is to make sure what's green on the outside matches what's happening on the inside. Our case studies say it best. Stakeholders need skin in the game. Detailed scheduling prevents avoidable bottlenecks. A strong MVP can rescue a failing pilot. And risk registers only work when they're living documents backed by consistent communication. So what's the bottom line? Technical capability alone is never enough. When technology leads without business alignment, it gets a familiar criticism from the business side. This is just another technical project, one that doesn't understand how business value is created. And that's exactly why the pilots that scale are the ones that synchronize people, processes, and technology. And that synchronization requires getting at least 6 things right. First, minimize workforce readiness gaps because tailored training that bridges technical intricacies and business processes drives both stability and scalability. Second, manage resource volatility. Using a proof of concept helps to validate assumptions and surface risks before they become costly problems. Establish a pilot project management plan that sets a clear structure, expectations, ownership, and agile decision-making right from the start. Shift procurement strategies by moving the focus from technical deliverables to mission outcomes. Adopt outcome-oriented metrics. This is so your technical success is always measured against mission value, not just functionality. And finally, lock in executive sponsorship early and treat user adoption as a primary success metric, not an afterthought. So we've tried to make this easy to put into practice. The appendices in our white paper include practical tools you can use immediately. And I'd like to encourage you to check it out. The link's at the bottom of this slide. Thank you all. Now, happy to open up to questions and comments.
Gabriel, there is a question in the chat from Neil Desai. I have a somewhat tough question. All of these are excellent best practices that have traditionally led to proven success. In 2025, many of these practices, governance, change management, training, etc., were deprioritized by agencies due to the influence of DOGE, which favored rapid delivery and deployment. What is the current appetite in agencies for reinstituting these best practices, and or how might agencies apply these best practices while pushing for greater efficiency and reduced time costs to deploy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've all seen it evolve over the different administrations. I think from my perspective, I would say that you need to tailor it to the agency you're doing your work in. So where something like human-centered design might resonate with an agency in the civilian business groups, it will resonate as well, perhaps, in a Department of War agency. And so you need to adapt to the context and the culture of the agency you're bringing your work to. I would encourage everyone, even in the current environment, to continue to push within the agencies what is becoming a more well-known approach. Gartner actually came out with it. It's called total experience, and that's where you tie that human-centered design directly to the digital experience or the technology. And if you can weave it in with metrics, then it's usually more acceptable to an agency. So you can lead with the SLA, for example, but always have a concomitant XLA that's married to that SLA. And then it's through the quick wins that you start to create your credibility, you gain the momentum, and you begin to manifest that change. I'll hand it over to Lisa or Chineme if you want to add anything to that.
Gabrielle, you covered it pretty much. So
I don't, did that answer whoever asked the question, Nancy? Or
Yeah.
Varsha, I'm sorry. I don't know.
Yes, thank you. I think that does address, I guess, portions of it. I think it's a complicated question just under the, current environment. And just being able to, engage with agency leadership on these topics in ways that resonate with them.
Would add in
Yeah.
outside of procurement, you could take these, create a framework in any culture and make sure that you identify the enablers and identify the constraints and the common challenges that we have, because regardless of where you are, you're still going to have to address these. So whether it's overtly, where it's actually mapped out, or more covertly, because it may not be a priority, you should still, I think, be able to use this framework and these, the identification of these factors within any agency. But I definitely echo, there is definitely a difference between defense and civilian agencies in their acceptance of, formal frameworks, and you'd have to use your discernment with that with the customer. But hopefully this is helpful regardless of where you go. It's just a matter of how you integrate it.
I might add one more thing to what Lisa just said, Neil, and that's this. I have found that when you're in an environment that is looking more towards what is the mission outcome and how does the work support that, and not so much towards the human-centered design, I have found that within those agencies, there are people who do want to see organizational change management and the different experiences being leveraged. And the way to amplify that is by creating those change champion networks and creating those super users. So super users will typically be tied to the technical part, whereas your change champion networks oftentimes, are balancing both the technical and the soft skills. So by creating that change champion network, you then should be able to create some momentum and influence to flip resistors, for example, or those who are not necessarily have the same mindset to create change. Over.
Gabrielle, there's another question from John Morton. Pilots sometimes fall short due to cost constraints. Any thoughts on guidance to de-risk cost implications as pilots scale to production, plus the out-year O&M sustainment phase?
That's another great question, especially in the environment we're in. We're seeing more and more pilots and just great initiatives being cut because of costs. There are a couple of things that I've seen work. A lot of it does entail both using your soft skills and your hard skills. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that you tie the mission outcomes, the strategic plan of whichever agency you're working with, to business outcomes. If you can tie those two clearly together and map them to metrics and then create those quick wins, it's really hard for C-suite CIOs to ignore that. So sometimes in this day and age, you'll see a lot of the vendors are beginning to bring in AI and other innovative emerging technologies to create those quick wins. I'll pause there and hand it over to Lisa and Chineme, see if they want to add anything to that.
Well, I would give an answer that I got from an interview from a CIO, and it was quite plain and simple. He said, don't start if you don't have the full funding for it. And That sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it's just logical. If the funds are not allocated to a pilot program, and the funds are not allocated to moving it to production, then you should spend more time sourcing those funds and making a case wherever the case needs to be made to provide the funds for it. So in order to move from a successful pilot to a production, you need to make sure you have the funds secured to do that.
And so should just hit something that we saw when it started.
Gabriel, in and out again.
Plug it in again. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, better.
Okay. So what Chineme just said is really critical because we saw that a lot of the pilots that stalled, it was because they weren't funded. So another good way to source your funding is to create those business use cases. I'll give you an example. When the AI hackathon started, what was that, a couple of years back, and vendors would go in front of agencies, they would have to show a use case, a business use case that was aligned to the agency's strategic plan, and then demonstrate how their emerging technology, whatever it is, AI doing this or that, would help that agency meet that business use case. And the vendors who were successful enabled the agency then to get the funding, because the agency then could articulate why they needed to fund whatever business case they had that was aligned to their strategic plan. So this is a great example of where industry and government can work very well together. Over.
I will add one thing to that, going back to our common challenges, doing the legwork up front, which is making a very clear outline of what the MVP will be up front, avoiding scope creep. And it's very hard sometimes to limit when you're trying to sell an idea. It's to limit, oh, this is the functionality you're going to get in the pilot. But doing that up front will also prevent these cost creep, which will, create these gaps between what the anticipated cost is and what the actual cost will be. So I would just kind of look at those challenges too, and keep that in mind with whatever your framework is for presenting a solution to the government, and for the government too, in funding, to know what you're getting in what amount of time frame from the vendor.
David, would you like to share your thought with the team here?
Which one, Varsha? I've been chatting here a little bit.
Yeah, the last thought that you have in the chat, I thought you might as well.
I was thinking about some of the hard questions and talking around funding, or when you have real data and real success, things that are working, things that are hard to argue with, sometimes those things stand on their own. So just thinking about results are hard to argue with. Real proven outcomes are hard to argue with, and sometimes they make a case. So just a good focus on making sure that we are tracking success and proving that things are working or not. So you can decide if you want to move forward and continue the experiment, or if maybe it's time to cut those funds. So I just said outcomes for the win.
Yeah, outcomes for them. And David, tying that to Agile and having really showing how you can break down an epic into a user story, and you do your PI planning and what have you, and then you align the success of how you're integrating Agile into an agency's planning processes is another great way to integrate. You pull in the metrics to show how well you're reaching the definition of done, because a lot of these pilot projects don't have that defined. But if you incorporate the Agile methodology into it, it forces that definition, and then it also it's a forcing function for that metric to be created.
Totally agree.
Any other thoughts or questions from the audience? Hearing none. Well, thank you so much, Gabrielle, Lisa, and Chineme. This was awesome. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing the project link. We will make this presentation and recording available for those who are on the call today and for those who were not able to join. So this material will be available for easy access in the future as well. And before we wrap up, once more, thank you all very much. And our next ITMM COI meeting will be on April 14th, where we are planning to host a panel focused on emerging technologies, which will include AI, quantum, robotics, and a few other topics. So more details we will post on ACT-IAC's website on our events calendar page. So hopefully you will be able to join us for that conversation. And once again, thank you all who joined today for your time. And we look forward to continuing the discussion with the community in the future as well. Thanks all.
Thank you.